We're back at 25 minutes before the hour of 7 o'clock on this Monday morning. And this morning we're talking about standards. You know, standard for everything. A standard for weights, a standard for measurements. And now we're talking about standards for
laboratories.
Before we get to that, I want to know, why should we care in the first place?
Okay.
And so I want to invite our guest this morning, Dr. Claire Durant, who's a project coordinator, Trumel Redmond, a technical officer, and Jonathan Platt, also technical officer. Good morning, folks.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And you're waving that little standard.
Yes, so what we have here is the logo for the CARICOM Regional Organization for Standards and Quality. And maybe you haven't seen it before, but what we're basically saying is that we are an organization where we are helping to improve standards all over the region in all of the CARICOM countries.
Excellent.
I'm curious, though, how do you measure the effectiveness of your standards? How does it resonate with me and Miss Josephine Eagle Hall and the regular person?
What we are saying is that we want everything to be level. We want you to be confident that when you go to have something done, suppose you go to have a test done, that those results are going to be accurate, that all those persons who helped you, that they are technically competent, that when you go to buy bread and it says 200 grams on the packet, that you are really getting 200 grams of bread in that packet.
But who has the resources to police the labs in the region? I mean, are there enough inspectors? Do you have to have specific qualifications for the people who draw the blood? I mean,
that's part of what you do.
Yes. So what we are saying is that if you are working towards having your laboratory, for example, a medical laboratory come up to the international standard, which is the ISO 15189. They're international standards that relate to all types of activities. What we are saying is that laboratory assessors, they visit the laboratories and they check. They look at all the activities, they examine what you are doing, the machines, and then they also look at the technical competencies of the people, so that everything, you are certain that everything that is coming out is being done to an international standard, and make sure that you are getting the best result. Best practice.
So that's how we bring it home to the average person, so that they know that if they go and they get a blood test, the information they get back is really theirs and exactly the information they're supposed to get back.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Now let's go to Trumel Redmond. He's a technical officer, accreditation and conformity assessment with CROSQ.
Yes.
What does that role essentially mean?
Okay, so like Dr. Durant was mentioning, as it relates to standards, accreditation and conformity assessment now comes into play to ensure that those requirements that have been set in standards are actually being met.
Right.
So accreditation provides the confidence that the result that you're actually getting is the result for the sample that you would have submitted. And conformity assessment is looking at those requirements that have been set, if you're actually meeting those requirements. So for the consumer, they can relate to it. So for example, when they go to the market and they're purchasing fruits and vegetables, they have in their mindset what they're looking for.
Right.
So if they're looking for tomatoes, they may want the tomatoes to be large and red. They may not want it to be green. So in their minds, they already have some requirements for that tomato that they're trying to purchase. So conformity assessment is that process where you're checking to see the requirements that you have in mind or in place are actually being met.
Okay. How large is your workload? I mean, what are the challenges in your specific area in terms of conformity?
I think some of the challenges, given that we're working with countries across the region, you know, each country has its own peculiar needs, and as such we're working to see how best we can address those needs. So the different needs of the countries can be challenging, you know, to ensure that we meet all of those needs. But I think one of the key things that we have recognized and I'm appreciative of is that, you know, everyone is on the same page. Everyone wants to improve their systems, and as such, that helps in overcoming the challenges.
Okay.
Well, that brings Jonathan Platt into the discussion. He's a technical officer of standards development, engineering, and building components. And my good friend here referred to the region. And when you think of the region, we're a region of mostly little islands surrounded by sea. And salt air has, a real detrimental effect on construction. And one of the things that you've been looking at is setting a standard. Let me make sure if I get it right. Salt mist corrosion testing of photovoltaic modules. What is that all about? And does that hit home to the problem of salt air impacting
the region,
us in the region and in construction in particular?
Well, basically what it's mentioning there, Doug, is just that there's standards. There's a myriad of standards out there, and BNSI has adopted a number of standards. Now, we have to know the reason why. The reason why is basically very simple. We know that there's high energy costs now, and people are really driven now to look for alternative means of energy. So now we see that PVs are coming on, photovoltaic cells, and people want to do these things. But we also have to be cognizant that we don't want to just take anything and accept it. We want to ensure that it meets certain criteria and standards, and that's where we look for standards out there. ISO, for example, have a myriad of standards dealing with PVs and alternative energy. And one of the testings that they do is salt mist. And what it is, it's a corrosive action. It sort of accelerates the corrosion of the PVs. And what this would allow them to ascertain then is what kind of coating should be on the PVs that will give them some longevity. So that's what the testing is about.
There are 10 critical standards related to energy. What else would you like to highlight, and how are you going to manage them, going forward? How are you going to police that?
Well, we don't do the policing. We're like the authors but not the enforcers, right? So we just tend to we have a knee-jerk reaction, so to speak, with regards to the needs of what people want. So the fact that people are concerned about high energy costs and they're looking at PVs, then we look for a standard that would ensure that they meet a criteria that's acceptable.
And this question goes to any of you, how do we ensure that we don't get involved in the traditional knee-jerk reaction? That is, someone in Butte, Montana in the United States said this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and we try to implement it here, not even giving consideration to the fact that our culture is different, geography, all these different things that impact us here.
Can I answer that one?
Yeah,
I'd like to answer that. What we tend to do, you see, although we are technical officers, we do look and see what's happening, what's new, what's innovative. And then we try to propose it to some of the stakeholders and say, well, this may be a standard that you need to look at. But we don't just demand or we don't dictate that these standards be applied. We look at stakeholders, we give them the documentation, and we get their viewpoint. If they say, no, we're not ready for that, then of course we wouldn't then want to issue out that standard. But we have to have feedback from stakeholders.
But who does the research on the standard in the first place? I mean, do you depend on ISO or do you depend on some other rating or standards organization overseas?
Well, what we are saying is that we have the International Standards Organization, and they have standards developed for the entire world. America has standards, Europeans have standards. And whenever a standard is developed, for example, standards to do with laboratories, they are developed by consensus. All of the countries in the region can participate. They can be on the technical committees, and they can put their input into the standards so that when it comes out, then we in the region, we have had an input so that when it's actually implemented, it's not that it's being thrust on you and you do not know what it is all about. And we also can propose standards. So suppose we wanted to have a standard for fish, or we can propose a standard, and we can have everyone else in the world be part of that and work with us to make it.
If I could just add, I think one of the critical issues that we need to recognize is when standards are being developed, it's developed by people who are actually involved in the sector. So you have these experts, you know, if it's a medical laboratory, if it's a testing laboratory, if you're looking at scuba diving, it's persons who are actually involved in the activity. So by doing that, you're ensuring that the persons who have the know-how, who have the skills, and who know what the sector needs are actually able to present those needs in the standard.